with these thoughts at the back of our minds, let me formally give my thoughts here, which largely pertain to the global situation which a country like India, aspiring to take a twin-track approach to this seeking of prosperity, which has been long denied to us. Not denied by anybody else, but denied by factors which didn't help us to project and move faster, some of our own making and some global situations and the uncertainties. But today, Honorable Prime Minister has actually set the two-track in motion, one being reaching by 2047 a position where you're able to say that you're a developed country, Vikasit Bharat. If that is one of the track, the other track is how do you reach that unless you are Aatmanirbhar, unless you're self-reliant. Largely, it does not for a moment mean that we want to shut our economy and make ourselves look inward. So if the twin track is ready before us, and we will have to not go on a speed which in terms of numbers at 4, at 5, at 5.5 of GDP, but reach 8% of GDP is the one which can give us the speed to reach the destination. So we gather at a time when the very foundation of the global order are shifting beneath our feet. The world that emerged after the end of the Cold War, which led to the expansion of globalization, open markets, and the pursuit of multilateral cooperation, now appears to be a relic of the past. For 3 decades, a contested equilibrium allowed nations to pursue prosperity through integration and interdependence. That equilibrium has inevitably been upended, and the rules of international engagement are being rewritten, stating that the present is turbulent in some sense would be an understatement. The scale of the challenge which is in our hand is rather too big, so we will be understating the scale of the challenge at hand. What we face is not a temporary disruption, but a structural transformation. For decades, many Asian nations absorbed the material gains of globalization without adopting the same political values that represented or underpinned the Western society. Today, they assert alternative models of growth and governance, drawing on their civilizational continuities. Their emergence questions the assumption of the Western liberal values are the only path to economic success. These nations have become central pillars of the global order in economic, political, and technological terms. The absolute dominance once enjoyed by a hegemon is now contested. In this context, therefore, India's rise as a stabilizing force is neither accidental nor transient. Instead, it results from a powerful combination of various factors. Improved quality of capital expenditure and reining in inflationary pressures has been consistent. We have implemented strategic reforms that enhance the ease of doing business, promote financial inclusion, and improve the quality of life for the average citizen in the country. With the steady share of consumption and investment in the overall GDP over the years, India's growth is firmly anchored in its domestic factors, which minimizes the impact of external shocks on overall growth. As a result, the Indian economy is resilient, continues to grow sustainably. For many smaller developing nations, the current geopolitical environment poses fundamental questions. To be sure, there are risks and opportunities, but questions do loom large. Will the world remain unipolar? Or are we entering a truly multipolar age? If multipolarity is our future, what shape will it take? Will it be one of cooperative pluralism, where different models coexist? Or will it harden into rival blocs and spheres of influence? Getting back to the old jargon, forcing nations to pick sides. History offers no guarantees, but the possibility of a fragmented world with multiple centers of power and competing values appears to be more likely. Today, we find ourselves in a shifting global landscape that resembles a zero-sum approach, in part, a consequence of the failures and limitations of the era of globalization that preceded it. So overlaying these in a world of profound imbalances, trade imbalances have hollowed out industries in some nations while creating overcapacity in others. Financial imbalances have concentrated wealth in speculative sectors while depriving the real economy of investment. Energy imbalances have made some societies chronically dependent on costly imports, even as others subsidize their industries with cheap, carbon-intensive power. Net zero commitments pursued with regard to trade-offs risk driving up costs for developing economies while constraining their growth. These imbalances have become structural features of our world, distorting incentives, fueling political discontent, and so on. So the task before us, therefore, is not simply to manage uncertainty, but to confront imbalances.
I think it's the most heightened in recent living memory, and at the same time, I would add that each of our countries are also experiencing various and different domestic constraints, whether economic, social, or political. So how should us, Asia, including my region, Southeast Asia, and India, respond to ensure that we can travel on the path to prosperity? India has the Viksit Bharat 2047. Indonesia also has Vision 2045, the Golden Vision, to reach developed country status. And it will require us to have higher growth than what our currently is experiencing. So let me put forth my main message up front, that we know there's all these uncertainties, and it is more than usual. It is different this time. And we're not going back to anything that we were used to before all these disruptions happen. So it's not good enough for us to just navigate these uncertainties, which means taking as given the harmful and fragmented course that is before us. We can't afford to sit on the sidelines, as Minister Nirmala already mentioned. We all need to do more together. The path to prosperity is about how we must build our domestic and regional resilience and chart the alternative course of this disrupted order, and take agency, the agency role for ourselves domestically, for our region, and for maintaining the needed reforms in the existing multilateral fora. We had a good run in terms of the development path that we all traveled on, based on rules-based multilateral order, whether in trade, in finance, and in general, where the rules and disciplines were clear, even on the security side, and unilateral actions by the mighty were disciplined because we had rules and we also had sanctions. But as we know, this has led to, this is now different. And in the past, interdependence was seen as a positive. It's win-win prosperity based on trust and confidence because of the rules-based order. But now we know this is now given way to where interdependence is actually seen as a source of vulnerability and risk. You can point to the US-China trade war starting in 2018, or even Brexit before that in 2016, and so on. It was beginning to unravel before the current Liberation Day tariffs. And traditional allies and alliances have also broken down, where we don't see the mighty or the major powers championing rules-based order or the needs and concerns of developing countries, as well as I think we are seeing a decline in the way we manage global public goods such as climate and health, and how we should be managing technological disruptions. In fact, we may end up with a very fragmented world, even in the use of technology. In other words, what we are seeing as part of the new reality, externally as well as internally, is that post-COVID, and actually the slowdown started post-global financial crisis. We all know that there's been a general slowdown of the global economy, and many countries have not recovered fully from COVID, leading to slower growth and slower growth trajectory. It's certainly true in my country, where we are growing at much lower growth than pre-COVID, even though we are still growing. It's a much slower growth path, and it's creating less jobs. And this is really what is a source of concern, and we are seeing the seeds of discontent with lack of creation of decent jobs, more creation of jobs in the informal sector with lower wages, squeeze on the middle class, and depending which country we are talking about in the region, we have different challenges demographically. In my country, as well as in India, it is about absorbing the youth employment. And in other countries, it's the opposite with aging. So the issue of labor mobility, talent mobility, and migration, obviously, is also another issue that we need to deal with.
I woke up this morning and on the plane over, I watched an old high school romantic comedy, which I loved when I was a kid. And you know, it does make me think, in a way, all of life turns out to be a kind of high school romantic comedy. Not always romantic, but at least a high school comedy of sorts. And our roles never change in a way. So I was thinking the United States these days looks more like the short-sighted dumb bully in the movie, who thinks that just by bullying everybody without building any kind of relationship, you can get ahead. And Russia looks like the kid who goes out there provoking everybody else, you know, and so on. So when I think about it that way, there actually is a unique role for India, which is the kind of smart kid who stays out of the big fights and makes things happen by building his own capacity, and shows up at the end of the movie and everybody claps always to see them. And although that may seem like a joke, I think there's a lot of truth to it if you think about where we are. So it's impossible to say what the new international order is going to look like. The current one is clearly falling apart. It's not going to be rebuilt. But it does seem to me, whatever form it takes, there is an opportunity for India to strengthen itself enormously within it, and basically by taking the large approach of managing the external pressures and uncertainties just for internal ends and keeping its focus there. And India is in, I think, from what I can tell, a unique position of having an enormous opportunity to do just that, to actually be a lot less dependent on what's going on in the rest of the world without being oblivious to it and without being disconnected from it, but to really manage those trends while focusing on all of the internal strengths, which are the real opportunities for growth.
Well, thank you for this very pointed question, although, as is always, I'm not in a position to commit any number at this moment. However, in the last 5 years, for clear, the numbers have not just grown by 1 or 2%, but has gone significantly high each year. So the commitment for public expenditure or capital expenditure through public finance or money given by the government for creating infrastructure or expenditure for creating assets has only grown rather than even plateaued. So that commitment continues is something which I can assure you. I also can see private investments beginning to see opportunities because unlike public investment, private investments obviously go on commercial considerations, but of late I'm seeing a greater interest in India for public and private investments to grow in sizable number. One nuance which I would like to put forward is the union government or the central government in India does not look at public expenditure as a tool through which it is giving that necessary impetus for the economy, but we have taken the states along with us. When I say states, it's the provinces within the federal structure. So the money is normally apportioned for them to also absorb, to do things within each of the states. I can clearly say that investment money we are giving to the regions so that all regions develop equally with public funds will continue, and there will be even a greater emphasis for states to receive this from us. And we see a lot of absorption capacity there as well. So the accent is more and more of public money, both through the center and the states. But now we see interest reviving in the private sector for PPP projects as well. So,
if you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.